Hestia is one of the largest providers of domestic abuse refuges in London and the South East, providing emergency and life-saving homes and support for those who need it. And this includes victims of modern slavery, survivors of domestic abuse, and those struggling with mental health issues, care leavers, and those leaving prison. Really pleased to be joined by Alessia Bianco, who is head of Everyone's Business, and she'll explain Everyone's Business and also the rest of the services that Hestia provides, and also by Debbie Oliver, who is Everyone's Business Independent IDVA Service Manager, and also great to be joined by Paul Quinlan from EY, who is Head of Employee Relations. We're going to take questions from the audience a little bit later on in the session. So if you could use the Q&A box to start putting your questions in as we go, that would be great. Your audience will also have access to the chat function, and please do add in where you're from, who you are, any comments as we go, other information that you've got. That would be really great, having that participation. You can live tweet during the webinar using the hashtag IDA Insight Hour. As always, please be mindful of the impact of what you write in social media or in the chat for the benefit of the others who are reading what you write. The Insight Hour is being recorded, and that's to help us to write up a note. Afterwards, we will do a summary of the session, and we will share that broadly with our membership through our Tuesday Trio newsletter, which comes out regularly. We appreciate that domestic abuse is a challenging topic. Please look after yourselves. Feel free to step away from the session today, go make a cup of tea, take a bit of time out if you need to. So I'm going to now turn off my camera, hand over to Alessia, to Debbie and to Paul, and then I'll come back a little bit later on when we get to questions. Over to you, Alessia. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Susan, for having us today. We're really thrilled to be part of the Insight Hour, especially on the 1st of October, which, as you've said, is Domestic Abuse Awareness Month. So I'm Alessia, as Susan has said. I'm the head of Everyone's Business. Hestia is a charity, as you've heard, who supports people in times of crisis. Last year, we supported over 18,000 people that were in crisis across a lot of the different services that we provide. And it's our Everyone's Business service for employers and employees, which we're going to talk to you about today. There are many different types of terminology that we use when talking about domestic abuse. And today we'll be using the terms victim survivors interchangeably, but of course recognise that these labels do not fit everyone's experiences. And because we're talking about domestic abuse, whilst we're not going to be going into any explicit detail about the types of domestic abuse or people's experiences, as Susan's already said, this topic can be really difficult and triggering. So please do whatever it is that you need to do to take care of yourself, both now and after the session. And if anyone needs any support, our Respond to Abuse advice line is open. And my colleague Ashley, who's on the call today, will be putting the details into the chat box as well. Also, please do use the Q&A function, as soon as Susan has said, to put any questions you may have to any of us in the panel, which you'll hear from shortly. Hopefully we will have enough time to answer all of your questions, but if we don't, any that we don't have time or need some time to respond to, we'll do that in writing, and we'll make sure that you will receive further information about the support that we're discussing today, available both for victim survivors and employers as a whole when thinking about domestic abuse. So Everyone's Business, so we started about 6 years ago. We would often see people at their most vulnerable in terms of the support that Hestia provide for over 50 years. And we saw that this was especially true for victim survivors that we supported who have lived experience of domestic abuse. And we knew that when working with victim survivors who were in employment, sometimes the response that they received from their employer was supportive, but more often than not, either no support was given or employers simply didn't understand why they should be supporting people experiencing domestic abuse, because domestic abuse was something that people thought happened predominantly behind closed doors and not something that they should be involved in. And when we think about the fact that 5-6 years ago, we knew that only 5% of organisations had a domestic abuse policy, which has definitely increased in recent years, but still isn't where we would like it to be. We can see the scale of the need. So working with sector partners and through consultations with victim survivors, we created the Everyone's Business programme, which is a programme of support designed to support both employees experiencing domestic abuse and employers to understand their duty of care and how to respond effectively. We feel really strongly that employers should not be experts in domestic abuse, but that they are often well placed to spot the signs and to offer signposting information and support to employees, as well as being part of the solution to break down the stigma and myths around domestic abuse. But the role of the employers, from our perspective, is not to complete domestic abuse risk assessments or interventions, which specialist independent domestic abuse advocates are best placed to carry out, but to believe, respond and refer, which includes signposting. And Debbie will talk a little bit more later about what that looks like. So since the start of the Everyone's Business programme, we've been really grateful and lucky to work with over 400 organisations. And I can see from the chat, including a lot of organisations on the call today. And we do this in a number of different ways, each of which is bespoke to the organisations we work with. So we support companies with policy support and consultations, including both UK and EMEA and global companies. We provide training for HR and line managers, domestic abuse ambassadors or champions in the workplace. And more recently, this includes sexual violence and sexual harassment in the workplace, as our independent sexual violence service for employers is also available. However, it is the domestic abuse support that we're talking about today. We have independent domestic violence advocates and independent sexual violence advocates for employees, which Debbie will go into more detail. And Hestia is also the home of the UK Says No More campaign. So for those of you that don't know, UK Says No More is a national campaign to end domestic abuse and sexual violence. And within that, it includes the Bright Sky app, which is a free to download app, which we've recently updated to include specific information for employers, family, friends, and victim survivors of domestic abuse. We also created Safe Spaces, which is available in a lot of high street pharmacies and banks. We created Safe Spaces during COVID, at that time where people were staying at home, etc. But our Safe Spaces schemes still run today. And they mean that victim survivors can access a confidential room, a private space where they can make contact with domestic abuse services or other specialist support, or contact their loved ones or place of work. To date, we have over 6,000 safe spaces, and we know that they're regularly used by people who are experiencing domestic abuse. And one victim survivor who recently used a safe space emailed us and gave us permission to share their experience. And what they said was, "I can't tell you how much of a difference the scheme made to me. I felt deeply unsafe that day, and your scheme gave me protection and support so that I could gather my strength and do what I needed to do for my children and myself." So I think that's really indicative to how useful having safe spaces on high streets, on pharmacies and banks can be. In conjunction with that, we also have online safe spaces, which is a widget which can be placed on internal and external intranet or internet pages, offering information about domestic abuse, also signposting information, and it crucially has a location service which tells the user where all their nearest safe spaces to them are. So for example, I'm in Aldgate at the moment. If I look on the safe spaces locator, I can see that there are at least 9 safe spaces within a 1-mile radius. And finally, we run the National Helpline for employers who need support regarding domestic abuse. And our Respond to Abuse advice line is also named in the Domestic Abuse Act statutory guidance. The details for the advice line, as I said earlier, should be in the chat. But you can also find out more information about all the services and safe spaces, etc., on our website and on our Everyone's Business page. So after working with employers for a number of years, we realised that whilst a lot of employers were doing lots of brilliant things to support colleagues, there wasn't a coordinated approach, which sometimes meant different people would receive different messages and information. So again, in consultation with some of the businesses we were and continue to work with, we created the Everyone's Business Best Practice Award. So this is an award which celebrates and acknowledges the support that a company or organisation has put in place for its staff, including those who are supporting colleagues experiencing domestic abuse, but beyond a policy or guidance that some people may not know about or training which is never refreshed. To date, we've got 18 organisations who've received the award, and the award is decided by an independent panel made up of subject matter experts and organisations who are leaders in supporting their staff. And we just wanted to share with you what some of the key learnings and innovation we've seen across these organisations are. It's not the totality because of time, but they include strong evidence of senior leadership buy-in and a strategy on domestic abuse, which is evidence-based and has accountability for its actions as being really clear. Training for employees on how to respond to disclosures of domestic abuse, including the vital use of buy-and-for services. This is really critical to ensure that everyone's lived experience of domestic abuse is understood, as no two people's experiences are going to be the same. But we know that there are additional barriers and nuances for people with multiple complex needs, marginalised communities, and so really important that we see that from companies looking at having a holistic response. Communication was another critical thing. The way that companies support employees, businesses can have the most amazing support available and the best of intentions in putting that into place. But if no one knows about it, then it can become a bit pointless. So we've seen companies use digital media, posters with QR codes that link to their domestic abuse support and policy, lunch and learns, stores in cafeterias, raising awareness, and animation used to highlight support available. Often the organisations who've won the Everyone's Business Award have used an array of different mediums, and their message is consistent and it's regular. One of the things that we know from supporting employees is that if they only see support on domestic abuse in their organisation on the internet, for example, mentioned once or twice, most people will not take the support forward because they're either worried their organisation may not be meaningful in their support or might take the support away. And we've got Paul Quinlan from EY here today, who'll be speaking shortly about what EY's experience are of supporting colleagues. And one of the key things that we feel they do really well is ensuring that domestic abuse consistently stays on the agenda. So we've now opened expressions of interest for the next round of the awards for all companies, and that will be announced in March during No More Week, which is the global week around domestic abuse and sexual violence awareness. So, and if you are interested or want to know more about how your organisation can be involved, then do please get in contact with us. We're also looking at other any sector partners who would like to be involved in the independent panel, and we will be reaching out to the organisations who currently hold the award or their award has lapsed to understand what next steps can be taken. And we'll be holding a series of roundtables during the 16 Days of Activism, which runs from the 25th of November to the 10th of December. And these will be focused on existing holders of the award and organisations who don't currently have the award, but would like to understand more and learn from each other, because that's part of what these Insight Hours are about, kind of all of us coming together with a shared approach. We're going to be publishing further details about this in the coming weeks. And I'm delighted now to pass over to my colleague Debbie, who will talk you through the IDVA support the Everyone's Business team provide and how it is part of a holistic programme of support, putting safety and advocacy for survivors at the forefront. So Debbie, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alessia. Yes, hello everyone. My name is Debbie Oliver, and I know Susan at the start, thank you Susan, said what my job title is, but I'm the service manager of Everyone's Business, both the IDVA, so the domestic abuse advocate element of the service, and the ISVA, independent sexual violence advocate, part of that team at Hestia. So as Alessia has just described, I'm just going to provide a brief overview of the service, a little bit of background information, and talk about the domestic abuse support and the advocacy focus that we have both with the victim survivor and with the employers that we work with. I will be referring to some notes and prompts, so please do excuse me if I'm glancing away or off to the side. I just want to make sure that I don't miss anything because there's lots of information to share. So thank you for your time and thanks for your attendance. So Since 2019, Everyone's Business IDVA service has supported over 500 victims across all levels of risk and across all gender. We've also given advice and support to over 400 employers across England and Wales, accessing our Respond to Abuse advice line. So that's from 2021 to the present day. As mentioned earlier from Hestia, Respond to Abuse advice line continues to be a vital part of our service, reaching employers from any sector, providing initial safety planning in the workplace and guidance for employers' responses, employers' response to employees who may have disclosed domestic abuse. In 2020, we started the IDVA service as a pilot project with funding from the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. Our first IDVA service began with the Metropolitan Police, where we were honoured to support police staff and officers who were or are victim survivors of domestic abuse. We quickly learnt how vital having a workplace response could be. Many people we supported within the Metropolitan Police told us they were not able to access services that were maybe set for members of the public. And that could have been due to feelings of shame and maybe stigma around their role, or potentially working with those members of the public in different situations and circumstances. So we now support a number of police forces with both the domestic abuse service and the sexual violence service support, and provide frontline advocacy support to financial services, and as mentioned, one of which is EY, and you're going to hear from Paul shortly. And we've provided support to construction sectors and other service industries. Our IDVAs are all qualified and work within the government definition of an IDVA to empower victims of domestic abuse to regain control over their lives, strengthen their safety, independence and autonomy by providing independent support and advocacy with a particular focus on safety. With a steady increase in employee referrals, our team of IDVAs and ISVAs have grown, and we continue to be creative and progressive to meet those best practice guidelines and, unfortunately, the growing service demand across the UK. I'll now talk in more detail about how we work in partnership with the employer from the outset. So right from that point of first developing the partnership with the employer, we will work together with them and devise a service level agreement that is in line with the employer's requirements. Within that, we'll agree key performance indicators and the reporting structure that is best going to meet the employer's needs. We ensure there's a thorough understanding of the employee's needs and what local service area, sector partners and service provisions are available depending on where that service is situated, but also from that wider sense of where those employees may be living outside of their work environment. We focus on a delivery of service that aligns with the employer's values, their strategic aims, and that places the victim survivor at the centre of the work. Our service is independent of the employer, so we offer confidentiality that doesn't automatically feed back to the referrer or the employer, but at all times refers to our adheres to our professional safeguarding duties. Empowerment and choice is at the heart of the work we do in our service, and we ensure we're always clear to the parameters of confidentiality with the people that we're supporting and the organisations that we work with. So every referral, everybody that we work with that comes through has a specific confidentiality and client agreement, which sets out very clearly our confidentiality practice and the support that they will receive. Some IDVA services connected to local authorities and community-led service may be commissioned to focus on risk-led outcomes, and understandably, we all want to be assured that those of us who are at greatest risk of serious harm or homicide have the most robust protective measures and support in place. At Everyone's Business, we work across all levels of risk and gender, as I've mentioned earlier, so that we can provide that immediate safety planning response, but as well as support around recovery, which we all know has no sort of set period of time of ending. We work in collaboration with the victim survivor. We listen to their priorities and their support needs, and we incorporate their perception of risk alongside our own professional judgment. So examples of safety planning we complete will include liaising with the emergency services such as police, fire rescue, hospitals, GPs, etc. And we implement agreed practical and emotional safety plans with the victim survivor that addresses safety and protective measures to minimize risk. Our work is embedded in trauma-informed practice, and this interweaves throughout all the interventions we use and the advocacy that we do. We're not a therapeutic service, but we offer really useful grounding and stabilization interventions and exercises, such as breathing. We explore, so the breathing techniques, relaxation techniques, etc. We explore key subjects such as empowerment, rights and responsibility, coping strategies, resilience, and we raise awareness around the relational dynamics of domestic abuse and coercive controlling behaviour. This helps the victim survivor to identify patterns of abuse and seek safe strategies for reducing risk. We work with victims and survivors, as I mentioned earlier, for as long as they need, and it's important that we remain open until they feel that they have the tools to move on to their next steps. We offer flexibility of support that can fit alongside the employee's workplace requirements and offer support in person, online, or over the phone, really as what suits them. So where they want to meet, what environment, etc., and when they want to meet. To the best of our ability, we will always be led by the person that we're working with. We're acutely aware that many of our clients will be working office hours, and therefore we do have that flexible approach to ensuring all victim survivors are supported. Another high percentage of our work is advocacy, is our role as advocates, not only encouraging the voice of the victim survivor, but also in our working relationship with the employer. So this often includes supporting employers or teams within the company to better and more fully understand the dynamics of domestic abuse and how they can support their staff in ways which allows them to confidently signpost or refer colleagues to an IDVA service and follows the Hestia Believe, Respond, Refer model. Over the years, we've addressed employers' responses, sought better outcomes for clients, and informed policy and strategic change within some of our business contracts. Our frontline perspective has fed into numerous victim forums, scrutiny panels on both national and local levels. We deliver and co-facilitate training and domestic abuse awareness presentations in partnership with the employer, and regularly attend staff network meetings to provide support and promote the services internally. At the same time, we aim to inform and support both employees and employers around their internal response to the victim survivor and their own internal policies and procedures relating to domestic abuse. I've added a small case study just for the impact of our work and what that has led from a client's perspective, as I feel that this is the most powerful testimony we can provide about the work that we do. I appreciate we're running a bit short on time, so what I'm going to do is potentially add that case study into either the chat option or ask Susan or the wonderful technical team there as to whether they can add that, just to give you an idea of some of the incredible work, advocacy work that our employers do with us and us with them. But I would like to just leave on one client feedback. So this is just some client feedback that we have and that we collect around the impact of the service. And there was one that particularly stood out for me, particularly for today, and it's, "You've made me realise I'm more than what has happened to me, that I was targeted and none of this was my fault. The world needs more people like you and like all of us on this call who are involved in this field of work. to assist survivors like me to find that peace. So thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Debbie, for everything you've said, and how powerful it is to hear those kind of voices of victim survivors. And I know that you actually had many more quotes and many more kind of examples, but just because of time, what we'll do is we'll put the case study that you so eloquently, not just you, but all of the IDVA and ISVA team had written. We'll send that over to Ida. So I don't know, maybe if in the Tuesday trio or in the comms, it can be, you can all have a read of that. I'd like to bring Paul in now, and we're just going to have a bit of a discussion, really. But hello, Paul. Lovely to see. I know I've already seen you, but Paul, obviously, could you tell us what EY's journey has been in supporting staff experiencing domestic abuse, and talk us through that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Hestia. And just a bit of background on EY, formerly known as Ernst & Young. We're a firm across the UK and Ireland with about 25,000 employees now. A lot of people training to be chartered accountants, so a lot of young people join us, and that has kind of safeguarding dimension with our apprentices. But chartered accountants, a lot more consultants doing sort of tech consulting or people consulting. So a real range of professionals across our offices across UK and Ireland, and a lot of home working as well. We started to get interested in domestic abuse in about 2018. And we launched our program then. Before then, we'd seen a couple of cases. I work in the employee relations team, and cases such as poor attendance or poor performance would come to my team sometimes. And one or two, there'd been a clear domestic abuse dimension to them. And there was kind of a degree of powerlessness in our view as to what could we do other than supporting people to our OC health service or our employee assistance program. But it didn't really work in those cases, and it didn't really seem like the right or a complete answer. We also had some strong interest internally from our family network in particular, and they were very keen for us to give, as a firm, to give everyone a week of paid leave related to domestic abuse. And I wasn't keen on that at all as a kind of standalone gesture. I felt that was not appropriate unless we really lent into this and provided a proper degree of support. Then just to say, well, EY will give you an extra week of leave, great, off you go, just didn't seem to be sufficient. And I felt also, to be quite honest, why was domestic abuse so important with all these other priorities that were coming my way? But I did look at the Office of National Statistics data, and that really was kind of the Damascene moment, as it were, when I realized the extent of domestic abuse. And I've seen on other IDA sessions so often where people suddenly talk about their employment journey and how they've seen the extent of the issue and suddenly noticed what has always been in front of them on the news and all around them. So we drafted some written guidance. There was a little bit of information out there, but not huge amounts of information. But I wouldn't like to say we were pioneers. There's certainly, I can see Lorna's on the call, who'd done some excellent work in another firm ages before we even realised what was going on in this field. So, pulling from other sources what we could was really helpful. But we were really thinking about this awareness point, and we thought, actually, if we just promote something through our internal platforms, no one's going to pay any attention, or not for very long. And we thought if we went external, we might get some more interest if we could sort of show what we were doing. And we linked up with Everyone's Business. We actually tried to join IDA, but they said we'd already members. So we went, well, who joined us, and then didn't do anything more with it. But it was really good to have those sources of support to get more information and knowledge share, really. So we developed what we call our HR guide, which is published, and that gives an overview of what domestic abuse is, and keeps it fairly high level about the information that's available, but does point now to our IDVA service, which we didn't have at that point. And there is more detailed guidance available too, but we were advised not to publish that all in one go, as potentially being a bit overwhelming for some people who might be interested in finding out what we were doing. But yeah, tools like the Bright Sky app, which you mentioned earlier, are really great to be able to point people who might go, Paul, I hear you're doing something in this space. I've got a friend, I'm meeting her for a drink. You know, what do I do? And actually saying, well, download this app, go along and run through the questions, was actually quite a sort of tangible, practical tool that we could share with people. We realized that actually what we thought, or perhaps our people thought, that this isn't something that applies in professional services. You know, domestic abuse just doesn't happen. Well, it does. It just was perhaps more invisible. And we did get a number of people come forward quite early on when we launched our program, particularly post-separation abuse, and actually talking about divorce. That was much more visible to people, and saying, well, not every person who's divorced is a victim of abuse or a survivor of abuse, but you know, that might be one context where it could happen. Actually made people realize, okay, perhaps there is more going on, and helped remove some of that invisibility. We continue to raise awareness, and the most practical way we've done that, again, not a new idea of EY's, was putting posters on the backs of toilet door cubicles in all our toilets across our UK offices. And the nature of the content of those was quite, it might not be, you know, ask for help before it becomes a crisis. So not trying to show the most extreme forms of abuse, but perhaps more subtle forms of control, of either credit cards or what people wear, or controlling children, really to get people thinking that perhaps what they were going through was abuse, and this was here was some practical help that people could take up.
Wow, that sounds like a lot, and quite a long sort of journey that EY have been on. Thank you, Paul, for giving us all of that. And I wonder, Debbie, from your perspective, obviously Paul's been talking a little bit about the IDVA. We've heard from you talking about the IDVA and the IDVA support with EY. From your perspective, what can you talk to us about what themes you've seen from the IDVA service, and if there's any nuances in supporting colleagues in different sectors or industries, finance sector, etc.? Oh, you're on mute.
I could have sworn I unclicked that, so apologies. Yes, of course. And I know, Paul, you mentioned it just then, around particularly so if we just think from a financial sector and the support that we provide for EY employees, but I think that's across, it's not just EY employees, but other employees as well. We get a lot of support needs around separation, around that post-separation safety planning. Is one of those aspects and areas. There's often partnerships where they are either on a joint tenancy, or they have a joint mortgage, or own property or assets jointly as well. So that will often provide those sort of barriers and challenges around safety planning, that leaving safely, because the safe spaces such as refuges, etc., for somebody who is employed is far more difficult to access from a financial perspective. So that's definitely one of those areas that we'll work with a lot of victim survivors who are remaining with their abusive partners until it can be remortgaged, there can be a buyout, or divorce proceedings happen. We know that through the family courts as well, through divorce proceedings, we know that through child arrangement orders, that can often be a way to prolong and continue the abuse as well. So often this will take a long period of time. So from an employee perspective, somebody who is working either a full-time contract or even a part-time contract, earning a salary. Another issue is around protective orders. We can make the applications for legal aid, and we do, and we support those applications. But often they will come back of having to make quite a significant financial contribution if they want to access something like, we need to, from a protective measures perspective, access something like a non-molestation order, which is a protective order to stop the alleged perpetrator from doing particular actions and behaviours. So we also then work a lot around and support around the DIY, so the do-it-yourself non-molestation order. So those are the applications that go through the court, get presented to the judge, etc. So there are a number of different themes and factors that I think work across all employees. And I think from a financial sector, that's probably amplified in the response to what they can access from a legal aid or a refuge or a community protective measures. Does that answer? I think I've rambled a little bit, but apologies.
You haven't at all. I think that from my perspective, that feels really clear, Debbie, and hopefully really useful for the people on the call to also think about why are we talking about an employer response? What are some of the differences and the things that you and your team see? And Paul, you've talked about a little bit about the support, kind of the history and some of the support that EY already have in place. I suppose I wondered, was there anything else that you wanted to say about that? And if there wasn't, what support, or not what support, what do you think employers can continue to do in this space?
Yeah, thank you, Alessia. I think we focused very much at the start on the 1 week of paid leave, and we were very pleased with ourselves for getting that approved. And it certainly caused a few headlines at the time. But in reality, when we started to see some cases come through either directly to EY or to everyone's business, and indirectly we were getting asked by you guys, can you help this person with a particular aspects of the situation they're in? We realized that paid leave perhaps wasn't what people always needed. I mean, it certainly has been useful for people to use extra time off for childcare where they are separated, but to spend more time with their abuser was obviously not what we were intending it to be for. But the main thing we realized quite early on was the breadth of issues and the complexity, and while our guidance could point people towards support, we quickly realized that actually the IDVA service was the most valuable thing we could point people towards. And it's taken a while to raise awareness internally of what an IDVA is. And certainly I'd never heard of it back in 2018 when we started. But just explaining that this is a free service for you, the individual. EY doesn't need to know you've spoken to them. It's not like occupational health where we have to refer you when we get a report back. We get very high level information on activity in terms of numbers of people using the service, and obviously sometimes people, we do engage with them in more detail because they've asked Debbie or whoever to ask about a specific requirement. But sending someone to a more EAPs, employee assistance programs have certainly upped their game in terms of raising awareness of support for domestic abuse. But with the greatest respect to them, I don't think they offer the same level of service that the IDVA service we have does. And just being able to say, rather than you must fit into this box because that's all we've got near this particular office location, to have a UK-wide service is just so valuable to us. So I say that's the most valuable thing. The paid leave I've mentioned. I think sort of finally, the training, we didn't go down the route of sort of domestic abuse advocates across our business. We did consider that, but we felt trying to maintain that level of knowledge and cover such a big population across so many different locations, we wanted, we certainly have trained up mainly our kind of HR teams who take calls. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the call might be about absence or performance issues, but without becoming obsessive about it, so often you start to scratch the surface and find that there is a domestic abuse issue involved in this particular problem that the employee and now the employer are trying to resolve.
Yeah, that's really insightful. Thank you, Paul. And hearing you talk about, the paid leave and the journey, remember that EY went through with that. It also made me think about some other organisations that are doing some really interesting things, like TSB have announced their flea fund, which some people may not be aware of, where customers of TSB can have up to £500, and it doesn't necessarily have to be to flee in inverted commas. It can be used for accommodation, for food, for whatever it is they need if they're experiencing domestic abuse, and that can be in branch or via their online kind of online banking. And TSB will support you to become a customer, even just to be able to access that. So I think there's lots of different things that people are doing for their customers, but also crucially from that perspective for TSB also applies to their employees as well. Thank you. And Debbie, if I could ask you the same.
Oh, I was just going to come in with, I just wanted to add, if that was possible, because the case study that also refers to an employer really supporting a visa application. So that's also been something that we've had from an employer's perspective, but also supporting with a case that was around a very sort of culture and familial abuse, and supported that employee from safely almost being seconded into a different area as well. So it's so creative, the work and the support that the employers offer, and EY is really testament to that as well. So yeah, I can go to Paul with anything and we'll try and work out a way that supports the employer.
If I could just have one more thing from you, Debbie, just a sentence, if you can, of what you think employers can continue to do to make sure that domestic abuse stays on the agenda.
I think it is it's incorporating that into their key values, into their strategic aims. We do a lot of strategic work. So I think just keeping that very much forefront around out of the health and safety arena that it potentially from a legal perspective would have been sat in, and make it more of that. Let's look at the holistic approach to our employees, and what way we have a duty and that we can support them through these very challenging at times.
Thank you. And I suppose just from my perspective, it's also thinking about those messaging. We've talked a lot about comms, for all of you on the call today, it's Domestic Abuse Awareness Month at the moment in October, but we've also got 16 days, and that can be a really pivotal time to start having those conversations in the workplace, but not forgetting that domestic abuse, unfortunately, doesn't just happen over 10 days of the year. It kind of those key messages are crucial points. Susan, if we can come to you, I can see that there's some questions that people are posting in the chat. If there's any that you want to put to any of us.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you all very much. I think keeping it on the agenda is something that we get asked about quite a lot, and I think, and it is so critical. And I do agree, Debbie. It's about stitching it into everything that you do. So it's not a sort of standalone campaign and something that you do at certain times of the year, or even it has to be embedded into the workplace response. And even things like thinking about when somebody comes back from a maternity leave, for example, we know that can be a time when domestic abuse starts or increases. Having some sort of question as somebody comes back in, is everything okay at home? That those sorts of really stitching it in at that sort of level can be really useful, because otherwise, people forget that you've got a domestic abuse policy and don't know to go to look for it, and that's the hard thing, I think. Got lots of questions. Paul, can I start with you? So there's a great question about did you face any issues from senior management when you wanted to bring in a domestic abuse response? And you did say, there was some question about whether people within EY would be experiencing domestic abuse. And certainly when I brought in the domestic abuse policy at my old law firm, that was a question I faced. Susan, surely nobody in our firm will be experiencing this. And of course, the reality is, yes, absolutely, they are. But did you face any challenges from senior leadership? How did you overcome that?
I think everyone's far too polite to have an outright refusal, but there are more subtle ways of of saying no. I think the fact we wanted to start with paid leave, we already had what we call our special leave, which covers time off family emergencies, bereavements, public duties, a range of things. So fertility treatment, and so adding domestic abuse to a list of things that special leave could be taken for wasn't such a big step in itself. But I think when we talked to certain business areas later, we did our training, we did our big launch. But as I said, I can remember colleagues sitting across from me going, "You're doing something in this area, aren't you, Paul?" It's like, yeah, yes, we are. But thanks for noticing. Yeah, I think one of my colleagues wanted to go in to talk to his team, and the partner in charge of that team said, "Oh yeah, I'll give you 10 minutes in the team meeting." But it was kind of a bit of a nice gesture rather than believing it was really necessary. But someone then actually said his mother had been abused by his stepfather, but someone else in the team then came forward. So I think once we had a few more examples, and actually going quite early amongst employers with paid leave got us some attention, and that was good news story. So everyone likes a good news story. So then it was like our success. Everyone was like lining up to support it. But my talent partner, the head of HR, was incredibly supportive, and having a senior sponsor, I think, is really useful. But with the support of everyone's business, UK Says No More, we got some external help from them. I remember it being quite intense at the time, but it seemed so much easier than just sort of casting around on your own, trying to find out what other firms were doing and what we might do next to ensure we were, as I said, it wasn't just a sort of flash in the pan paid leave, it was a comprehensive program of support.
Yeah, and I do agree. Getting that senior leader buy-in is absolutely critical to make things happen. So there is a question, another one for you, Paul, is how do you actually now organise the response? Do you have a task force? Is it led from within employee relations? What's the structure for that for you?
Yeah, well, I guess I got the gig, as it were, early on, because we were talking about paid leave, and I look after all the HR policies, and so that was why it became mine. I'm also responsible. I've got someone in my team who is responsible for health and well-being, and there's a lot of overlap there. I know in some firms that might sit with a rewards team, and in other organisations I've talked to, domestic abuse sits more with DE&I, or it varies, but I think you do need someone to really seize ownership of this. Otherwise, I think it can get, because it does touch so many areas. We work with health and safety, work with our security teams, IT, and if everyone thinks someone else is holding the baby, as it were, then it can quickly kind of lose momentum. I think initially it was quite hard work to get it up to the level it's at now in terms of awareness, but once we got the posters out there that I mentioned on toilet doors and had the IDVA service in place, it's much lighter touch in terms of supporting it. We have a quarterly meeting with Hestia to talk through the numbers they're seeing. I work with our central HR contact center to say that what are you seeing, and they know to let me know if a case comes in. So I've got one of my team that actually does the hard work, I have to admit. So it's much easier now, it's up and running, but getting everyone aligned, we got someone on a project basis for a few months just to help pull it all together and get things aligned. And actually, just one other point, you mentioned about maternity, and I think we actually put some information in our maternity policy, because we know no one ever reads the policies, but when they're going on maternity leave, they want to know what are they getting, how long have they got, and what support's available, and having a big section in there about postnatal depression and about domestic abuse, just saying, look, unfortunately, this is a point where you are going to be at higher risk, was a good way of raising awareness of the path to support.
I think that's a really great example of thinking about how you stitch it into different parts of the organisation and different policies. Not, I mean, obviously having a domestic abuse policy in itself, but stitching that into other policies and grievance procedures and all sorts of the disciplinary procedures and so on. You may well find you have a perpetrator of domestic abuse in your workplace as well. Another very challenging issue. But that's super interesting. And I love about the posters. I mean, people sometimes roll their eyes about posters on the back of toilet doors, but do you know what? I think they're just brilliant because it's a private space. You can change them from time to time. We've got a case study on our handbook, which was provided by Lorna and her former colleagues about, you know, the impact of posters. So I think those are really useful way, low tech way.
Because, you know, most people don't think they're ever going to, you know, their relationship they're going into now is always going to be fantastic. Yeah. And, you know, trying to be the voice of doom is never popular, but just having that information there, I think is just really worthwhile.
It's really useful. Yeah. If I can come to Alessia, there are some questions around the geographic scope of your services, and I may have confused things a wee bit at the beginning by talking about London and the South East in terms of
I saw it. It doesn't. I can answer it. Yeah. So Hestia, a lot of the Hestia services are, as Susan said at the beginning, London and the South East. Everyone's business. We work nationally, so across all of the UK, we have, as Paul has said, you know, EY offices in Birmingham, in London. Some of our other IDVA and ISVA services are in Nottingham, Bedfordshire, like all over. And not even just the IDVA ISVA services. A lot of the companies that we work with from policy support, training are not just UK based, but also global as well. So hopefully that answers that.
Brilliant. We've had a request to share toilet door posters, and certainly we've got posters at IDA that we prepare and made available for the last 16 days of activism. We're planning some more this time around, so we'll share those and people can then put their own logos and things on. But that's very useful. Can you share a little bit, Alessia or Debbie, about, are you able to share any themes of the sorts of questions that come across from employers calling up on the employer helpline, the sorts of things that come up regularly?
Yeah, so one of the things that often comes up, I was on the Respond to Abuse advice line last week, and almost all of the calls were from people in times of crisis, where employees had come to work with bruising, or employees had disclosed that they were feeling very frightened about their current partner or family member. So what we see in the Respond to Abuse advice line sometimes is people calling at a time of crisis, and managers particularly either being told the information for the first time or having suspicions that someone might be experiencing domestic abuse, but they didn't know what to do about it. And when it gets that critical point that they feel like, oh, I really have to do something, I don't know what to do, let me call the advice line. And what we often talk about is the importance of being domestic abuse curious. So some of the conversations that I was having last week with someone was about their trepidation of, if I ask these open-ended questions, like Susan, you were mentioning, it might annoy the person. They might not be experiencing domestic abuse, and that's true. But if we don't do anything and they are experiencing domestic abuse, then you know, they don't know about signposting, they don't know about that. But Debbie, predominantly her and her team are on the advice line, so I don't know, you've probably got some different reflections as well.
I agree with it. It does seem to be, particularly over the last year, it's more crisis led. So that's whether that's coming through via the phone or via an email, as in, this situation has just happened. This is what I've done. And there's been some fantastic responses from employers out there. Have I missed something? Do I need to be doing something else? So I think a lot of those, when we make that contact, a lot of those calls will sit around safeguarding duties. So thinking around, does the potential victim survivor, in this case, are there children in the house? Are there concerns around that? Does anything need to be raised from a safeguarding perspective? And obviously we need to refer them back to their own safeguarding policies in that respect. We have inquiries that come in where potentially both employees, so there's a counter allegations. So one employee has gone to HR to disclose, etc. And actually then the partner now then comes in a little while later, discloses. There's one at the moment actively that we're working on around that. I've got both parties telling me that they're victims. What do I need to be doing with that? So we can signpost, we can give that advice around best places or things for them to be considering, resources for them to be looking into, or signposting local services. We will do a lot of local service signposting because we won't get the information of the victim survivor or necessarily their home location. But if they're willing to give us the location of the business, then what we can do then is give them a rough overview of the local services that are available for their employees, and workplace safety planning in the workplace, because it's not just the employees. We're often thinking around, what about their colleagues? Is there a risk of alleged perpetrator showing up at work? What needs to be in place? And some of the education settings, nurseries in particular that we've supported, we do a lot of that workplace. We'll go through what's the system for access into the building, etc. with them. So it's as broad as it is narrow, but hopefully that helps.
That's super helpful. There's a yes/no question, or a question about how is the service funded, and my guess is it's funded by the employer. So I think that's a relatively.
It is. It's funded by the employer. The individual employer
Yeah.
will fund the service. Yeah.
So there's one final question: has anyone used mental health first aiders to be advocates for domestic abuse? I can reply a bit to that. So we do know that quite a lot of organisations will use mental health first aiders as advocates. Some organisations feel that's putting too much of a burden on a particular group. Some organisations, Paul, you mentioned that you don't particularly have advocates across the business. There's all sorts of different ways of doing it. I do think I'm a mental health first aider, and I think the training I certainly had helped me in terms of listening skills and those sorts of things, which I think is a good building block, if you like. So that would be one answer from me. It is 2 minutes to 2, so I am going to draw this to a close. We've had a question about whether it's being recorded. The answer is yes. Yes, absolutely. We can share the case study that you were talking about. We'll pull together some materials in discussion with all of you and then share that back out with everybody on the call and also people who weren't able to attend. I'd just like to finish by a massive thank you to all three of you for joining us today and for sharing your insights and for answering all these questions. Really grateful for everything that you're doing, and really helpful to have the granular suggestions and ideas, Paul. I think employers find that really, really helpful. A bit of competition in terms of what people are offering their employees is always a good thing, alongside some reassurance for smaller businesses that often it's just that it's the listening and support that really matters the most and is at the heart of a good response. We will share a summary of today, and you will get these materials in our next Tuesday trio. If you don't get our Tuesday trio, please do sign up for it. There's a link that will be going into the chat. And just to say that our next Insight Hour will be in November on the 26th, Tuesday as always, 1 to 2. And we're going to be focusing next time on honour-based abuse, and we'll be joined by Carmen Nirvana, really just to help people to understand the broader range of abuse, the types of abuse, and the different ways that an employer might need to flex their response to deal with very challenging issues. There's again a link in the chat, so you can sign up for that if you'd like to come. So big thank you to the three of you. Thank you to our audience very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in November.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Take care.